Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Stern, and this is Beebe Book Buzz, and we're really happy to have you here on 2/2/22. It's an exciting day for us because we have a new book buzzer, and if you can call it that, I don't know if that's a good term or not. Erin, who is with us, she's our newest member of the reference staff, and we are very excited to have you along.
Thank you very much.
And today we also have Beth with us, and the three of us are going to be, as we usually do, telling you about what we have recently read that we'd like to share so you can find your next great read. So I'm going to start today with Beth.
Okay, so my book is called These Savage Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant.
These Silent Woods. Did you say
Yes.
savage?
I think I did, because there are some savagey things in it, but it's not that
Oh.
savage a book. I was a mistake. It's more silent than savage.
Okay. Tell us about it.
So the story is that for 8 years, Cooper and his young daughter Finch have been living in this rustic remote cabin in the Northern Appalachian woods, these silent woods.
Right.
And that Northern Appalachia means like New York, here in New England. And they've been living without any electricity, no plumbing, no other family, basically minimal connection with the outside world.
Mhm.
It's a hard yet really beautiful existence. It's filled with spectacular nature and books. There are a lot of books in the cabin. And yet Cooper is haunted by his past and is hiding the two of them from the world. So for 8-year-old Finch, that world is beginning to chafe. It's too small, too constricted. She's longing for the outside world and its people. So silent again, Karen.
Very quiet.
The story is told by Cooper, and it's mostly in the present, but there are some flashbacks. He's endeavored to build a safe and loving world for Finch after his wife died in her infancy. We get insight into his state of mind and his thought processes as he struggles to give freedom to bright, inquisitive Finch, while also protecting her from his past. Not only his past, but his loneliness, his vulnerability, and his distrust of other people. But you're also buoyed by his hope that maybe one day things could be different, and the lengths he would go to protect Finch. Having recently read a number of books where it's an isolated dad with a young girl, I was really happy to be reading a book about an isolated father who doesn't abuse his daughter, who's very loving. And Finch in this book rings really true. She's precocious, curious child. Her openness, maturity, her budding independence, they're all a nice balance to Cooper's loving but anxiety-riddled self and his jaded view of other people. So the author, Grant, she also excels at setting. So I want to read this description to you. Let me just get it up here. He makes a visit to Walmart. Walmart is a startling and bewildering place. The lights, endless ranks of fluorescents, shine with devastating brightness. The rows and rows of gigantic television, all blasting the same scenes in varying degrees of clarity and with the slightest amount of difference in timing, so that if you stop and stare, one screen is maybe a millisecond behind the next one. Dizzying, baffling. Blue and yellow signs hang everywhere. Low prices, huge savings on electronics. It doesn't help that the holidays are right around the corner. So they've got Christmas trees and ornaments and plastic reindeer and a giant blow-up Santa whose head bobbles back and forth. The sheer abundance of it all is so much of everything. There is nothing muted about it, nothing held back. So
I feel that way at Walmart sometimes too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way
She's also,
the TVs, I can almost feel that when there are
I
no.
know.
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah.
such a good description. I loved it. And that sense of every second one being off.
Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, it just makes your skin kind of crawl, doesn't it? And I can imagine in contrast to the setting that you're talking about, it's really jarring.
Exactly. And she does a great job with both of those
Mhm,
two
mhm.
really disparate settings.
Yeah.
So she's also able to evoke mystery and that sparse, bare existence that they live in the silent woods. And it is part mystery. There are mysteries like what is haunting Cooper? Why is he isolating Finch from the world? Will they be discovered? But it's not an edge of your seat thriller. The mystery is always there, hovering in the background, coloring everything. But in the foreground, it's Cooper and Finch, and it's their living. In fact, it almost feels like a day-to-day book, not a rush, not extremely high on tension. It's more soulful and speaks to redemption and a lot of heart. There is some violence in it, both human on human and human in nature. After all, they are surviving in the wilderness, so they rely on killing some animals. But it's not a lot of violence. I think some read-alikes would be Winter's Bone by Daniel Woodrow. My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Talent. Now that does
one I
have
was
an abusive father,
right.
but it's also that survivalist alone in the woods. I think it's Appalachia too, although I think it's.
It is. I think it's
Southern.
further south, but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
And then also a nonfiction book, Educated by Tara Westover,
yeah.
about a woman growing up in a very isolated with her father and siblings.
Yeah.
So
There are a lot of those books at the moment. This I think we're fascinated a little bit by the idea of, surviving.
Yeah.
Both, what would it mean to survive, have to survive, and
All
then
those apocalypse stories.
right, and
The idea of prepping, like the preppers who
the preppers, yeah,
getting ready for the end of the world, and
Yep.
we
Yeah.
feel it now maybe more than ever because of like the last 2 years that we're coming out of, how we prepared in a panic mode to.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get those toilet papers into the shelter.
It's such great fodder for a novelist too, because you have to explore the emotional side of all of that isolation and what brought you, in this case, what brought you there in the first place. It's funny, my book there's some of that going on in this as well, but we'll get to that later.
And I also think since their world is so limited, they can concentrate on those characters, those few characters, and really draw in-depth portraits of them. It's really nice.
Right. And so you get that sort of day-to-dayness that you were talking about,
Yeah.
which is, but it's deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, and I probably these questions would be spoilers, but I'm curious to know what the girl's experience of it is, if there are friendships or if there's schooling or how she's educated.
There's no schooling except homeschooling, and the books provide a lot of that. There is one other character that lives, a neighbor, but other than that, there's hardly anybody except for in his flashbacks.
Right.
They're
Interesting.
characters. But really, that's why she's like, I want to meet more people.
Yeah, that's why she needs to get out, right?
Yeah.
So the book is partly dealing with that sort of instinct that she's needs to move on. She's growing up and she needs to move on, right?
And he's struggling with that because he knows she needs to leave him eventually.
Yeah. Okay, good. That sounds like a good one. And Erin has something a little different. She's got a memoir for us.
A little different. I have a memoir. It's called The Storyteller, and it's by Dave Grohl. And who is Dave Grohl, and do I need to know him to enjoy this book is going to be your first question. And I'm here to tell you that no, you don't need to know who Dave Grohl is to love this book, because I did not know who Dave Grohl was.
And what made you choose it then?
I was listening to a podcast, and podcast interviewers were interviewing Dave Grohl. So I heard him for 30 minutes and he was promoting this book. So he was talking specifically about the book. And I was so drawn to his speech style and voice. And I thought, I have to find out who this man is. So in a nutshell, who Dave Grohl is he's a rock and roll musician.
I do know the name.
Started out in a band called Scream, which is punk, I would say, to alt rock. And then he was the drummer for Nirvana.
Right,
And
that's it.
then he went on and started the Foo Fighters.
Uh-huh.
And then you're asking, do I need to like that music to enjoy this book? No, you don't. I've never listened to any of those bands. And I tried since reading the book, and I'm just not a fan. But the guy is fantastic. And I'm going to tell you why he's such a great storyteller.
I think I read another book that has some of him in it, but go on.
Book that has some of him in it. And there's also a book that his mom wrote.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. And he and his mom are tight.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm just going to take a sip of water here.
That was
I love it when
one with his mother.
Yeah,
I love it when moms come into the books.
I know. And he's so in love with his mom, and it's one of the really endearing things about him. So this is the story of his life. And it's told in about 5 chunks. It does jump around in time, but it's pretty easy to follow. The chunks are essentially his early years. He grew up in Springfield, Virginia. How he became to understand his passion for music. He's a completely self-taught musician. He has taken one lesson in his life, and that was it.
Wow.
Yeah, he learned by listening, and he learned by through his own just passion and practice. He talks in that section about a life-changing trip that he took to Chicago to see his cousin Tracy, who he discovered was a punk rocker. And she took him out to some clubs and introduced him to music and record labels that he did not know existed. The second section talks about his years as a drummer for Scream, which was a band that he idolized when he was a child, like a younger kid in his early teens. And he happened to become their drummer by finding a pamphlet with a phone number at his local music store because they needed a drummer. He called the number, had an audition, and it's no spoiler to tell you that he became the drummer for Scream.
That's wild.
Yeah, and he lied about his age also. And he set about to convince his mom that he needed to drop out of school to follow his passion, and she let him, which was the most amazing thing.
How old was he at that point?
17 years old. And
Wow.
he was 19.
Wow.
And all his mom said to him was, "You better be good." And in this section, it's really fun to read about his band riding around the country in a van that holds 6 men and all of their musical equipment, because they are their own tour bus, but it's a van that they've reconfigured to have like beds up top and all of the equipment at the bottom. They're sleeping head to toe like sardines.
Wow.
It's really a classic like on the road type of feel where they're just out there living on very little money, eating cans of beans and burritos they get from the 7-Eleven during the period of time where it's like 2 for $1 in the afternoon. And it's all pre-internet, so they are relying, he's got postcards in this book, postcards he sent to his mom along the way.
Oh, neat.
In section 3, he talks about his time with Nirvana and how they rose to a level of fame that he could not have even imagined.
No.
He then talks about how he started the Foo Fighters, a band of nothing. He had to reinvent himself when Nirvana split and Kurt Cobain died. And he recorded the entire Foo Fighters first album by himself. He played all the instruments. He was the band.
Oh my God.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. And then in the final section, he talks about himself today as a rock icon and as a dad and a husband. The book is very informed by his relationship with his daughters. He starts the book out because his daughter comes to him and says, "Dad, I want to learn to play the drums." And he's like, "Oh my God, really?"
You can't say that.
Yeah. "I want you to teach me." And so over time, he keeps, he'll jump back into a story and then into today's time about what's happening with his family. So there's a lot of back and forth in time, but it's, like I said, it's very easy to follow. And he almost does it in a very linear way because each time period is following, along the other in a parallel way. What makes this book wonderful and very readable is Dave Grohl's positivity. He's in a constant state of wonderment at his circumstances in life. When he's still a teenager, Iggy Pop suddenly needs a drummer at a gig. His drummer doesn't show up and he asks Dave to perform with him. He's on Saturday Night Live performing with Nirvana and he can't believe he's there. He's playing a Beatles song in a small room in front of the Obamas and an actual Beatle, Paul McCartney. And many times throughout the book, he just keeps saying, how did I get here? And you really, his voice is just so, he really imparts his surprise and passion for everything he does and every choice he makes. He never thinks he's really good enough to be where he is. He has a lot of self-doubt, and that makes him very relatable as a man and a character and a musician and a parent and a bandmate. When he's called to perform at the Academy Awards, or when a big rock star asks him to join his band, you sort of get the sense that he's looking around the room like this going, me? And the book is littered with humor. He is so funny. And I will say I did listen to this book, but then I read it afterward, and I recommend both. His voice is fantastic and he's a great storyteller.
So he reads it himself.
He reads it himself. But in the book form, you get the pictures, which is fun too. And it's fun to look along as you're listening.
Right. Yeah.
He tells funny stories when he's finally earned some money and he decides he's going to buy a homestead back in his town of Virginia, near Springfield, Virginia, where he grew up. He hires a realtor and he says to her, I'm going to need some privacy, so nothing under 400 acres. And she's like, okay, and has a really hard time finding him something under 400 acres to look at. And then he writes, I didn't know what an acre was. He has no idea. There's a time he tells the story of Paul McCartney wanting to come over to his house to meet his daughter when his daughter was little, and how Dave Grohl spent an hour running around his house hiding all his Beatles memorabilia because he was very embarrassed to own it, thinking like, Paul McCartney's gonna show up and see all this stuff, he's gonna think I'm a total weirdo.
Stalker.
Highly engaging book. And I would say the question is, who is this book for, right? Obviously, if you're a fan of Nirvana, Scream, Foo Fighters, music in general, I'd say this book is a total no-brainer. It's such a great book. But if you love a story about following your dreams, following your passion, finding your voice, standing up for what you want, going against the grain, this is definitely a wonderful book for that.
Great.
It's kind of rags to riches. He doesn't come from poverty. He's sort of middle-class America. But he's very self-made and self-taught, and it's a book about him just finding his place and working really hard for what he wants in life. And I would say some read-alikes might be something like The Boys, the Clint and Ron Howard book, because they're also so just jolly in their storytelling, and they have had a good childhood and good memories. This is not a he talks about dark things in this book. Obviously, he addresses Kurt Cobain stuff, but it's not told in a dark way. And he stays away from the details of a lot of the negativity. There's, some drugs in the book, but not a ton. There's some swearing in the book, but there's nothing that would really drive a reader away, I think.
I seem to remember when I heard them talk about him, that he had donated a lot of money to some kind of project. It seems like he gives back to the community.
He does give back a lot to the community. He doesn't talk about that in this book.
Okay.
So, and because I don't know who he is outside of this book, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sounds like something he would do. He's definitely, he seems to be very revered in his circles as a very, very nice guy. Yeah.
That's great. It's nice to hear about upbeat books these days. So many of them are dark, and there's a reason for that, but it's great to hear about people that you can truly admire out there in the
Oh,
world.
exactly.
That's great. Okay. All right. I'm going to finish off with another book about the woods in a different way. This one's called Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte Mcconaughey. And this is one for all of you who love a good drama set in the Scottish Highlands. I'm going to call out all you Outlander fans. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but Once There Are Wolves has a little something for everyone. There are mysteries, one from the past, one from the present. There is love, there is political drama, and yes, there are wolves. This is at its heart what we call ecofiction, and the wolves are really beautifully described in this. She's obviously done her research, and she brings us what you might call it like kind of an eco thriller. It's all set amongst the idea of rewilding this northernmost reaches of Scotland. And one of the basic tenets, in case you don't know really what rewilding is about, of rewilding an area is that you bring back the apex predators, which is what the wolves are. You bring them back into an ecosystem where they've disappeared, and it helps to restore the balance, because when those predators come back, the herbivores like the deer are managed, and when the deer are managed, then they don't eat all of the plants to nothing, and those native plants and trees have a chance to regrow, which then allows for birds and other small animals to come back. And in cases like in Yellowstone National Park, rivers have literally begun to flow in different patterns that in places that were barren before. And so it is kind of amazing that what they've discovered about this whole how to rewild an area. There's a really good little YouTube video called How Wolves Change Rivers, which is just a few minutes long, but it talks about the Yellowstone project that started back in the 1990s and how successful it was when they brought the wolves back to Yellowstone. Anyway, so that's the sort of that part of it. But then of course there's all the fear surrounding wolves. There are the scary ones in all the fairy tales that we've told ourselves for centuries. And you can kind of imagine that the pushback from the farming communities in these Scottish Highlands. So when our main character, whose name is Inti Flynn, comes in and she and her team arrive to kind of shepherd this project, there is a lot of pushback. There is a lot of anger. There's a lot of fear. And so that's kind of the frame, the political drama that I mentioned earlier, is happening because of that. So we've got Inti and her team. We've got the angry villagers. We have a craggy, dashing police chief named Duncan. And there's the love interest. And we've also got Inti's identical twin sister, Aggie. And Inti and Aggie's stories are indelibly entwined with the plot. Their backstories are indelibly entwined with the plot and the heart of this book. The sisters are very close in the way that twins can be. And as we get to know them, we realize that they have both arrived in Scotland very emotionally damaged. So the backstory of why Inti seems to find it like impossible to get along with almost everyone, including Duncan, who she's falling in love with, and why Aggie can't even speak or leave their rented cottage. That's one of the mysteries that unfolds as the book moves forward. So that's sort of from the past, and there is some flashback in the book, but again, not easy to follow, easy to deal with. The other mystery revolves around a body that turns up one night in the woods with its guts ripped out. And this is the body of a man that more than one person, including Inti herself and Duncan, have reasons to dislike. But on top of all that, Inti knows that the manner of the killing, which looks like it could be wolves, will lead others to believe the worst about her beloved animals, and could possibly end the whole rewilding project. So she does something that's very impulsive and very unwise, and therein lies the second mystery. So there's a lot of room for the high drama and the romance in this plot. And I haven't even told you, there's quite a few more plot points I could mention, but I'm not even gonna go there. And this is one of the reasons I kind of shouted out Outlander at the beginning, because this setting, which Mcconaughey does really beautifully, she definitely has a sense of the beauty and the drama of the landscape. And it creates this perfect backdrop and sort of amplifier for this this tale that will definitely sweep you away in the way I think that the Outlander books do. You don't get time travel in this one, but it's short, 256 pages, I think, but it still packs that kind of emotional punch. So I would highly recommend this one for nature lovers and mystery lovers with a good modern romance mixed in. It's not perfect. There are a few times, with I felt like it was a little preachy, or she got a little bit too much into the telling of how it all worked, the rewilding and things like that, rather than just letting it unfold. But they were few and far between. I didn't feel like that it got in the way. There was a couple of moments when I noticed it, but that was really all. But it's a passionate book. It surprised me in that way. It kind of again, it's not big. It swept me away, and I read it in about a day.
Nice.
It was great, and it's been a long time since the book's done that for me. So definitely recommend this one.
When was it written?
Oh, it's fairly new. It's last year. Or was it this year even?
And is it based on, did they really rewild?
They have not rewilded Scotland, no, but there is a movement, I guess, afoot to try. They've been talking about it, but it hasn't happened. So it's very much, she's created this. She, said she had always loved wolves, and she started reading about them and found them to be to be even more interesting and lovable and mysterious. I mean, there's a lot of things we don't still know about wolves, but then I think she read about the rewilding that has been successful, and she's was very passionate about it. So you can feel her passion coming through in the book. So
I read it and I loved it too. And it's funny to hear you say it's only 256 pages, because it does read like there's just so much going on in it.
There's so much in it when you stop and think, and she crafts the story. If you think about how many storylines and plot points she's got in there, because like I said, I left some stuff out. And she does it very well. She does really craft it well. So, and this is her second book. This is only her second book. She wrote Migrations a couple of years ago, which I got a lot of really good press as well, and I think has a similar maybe eco theme. I didn't read that one, so I can't speak to it completely, but she's one to watch. I like her a lot.
Great.
So I guess that's it for today then. We've I know, I was gonna say the themes that Beth was mentioning of the isolation and the wilderness, you get that, you get a real sense of that. And the fact that Inti and Aggie are kind of running to this place in the first place to get away, and that is a really big emotional driver in this story. Anyway, so definitely one to check out, Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte Mcconaughey.
So those could be a pair.
Yeah, no, they could. I mean, I think there's a lot of these books going on that are interested in the wilderness and what it has to give us. And in the end, I think she's interested in the rewilding of ourselves as well as the landscape.
Interesting.
So
I think I just wanted to add too, I think what she's great at in the story, in the character development of the story, is in talking about the twins, Inti and Aggie, that there is so much about Aggie that is in what the author doesn't say about her, because there's so much missing about her as a whole person. And you get that almost from the absence of, her development as a character, not just, as the way the author has crafted her, not just. And I think that's really fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right. And I should, when you mentioned Aggie, and I should really say that there is some of the problems come from abuse. So there is a scene of abuse in this book, which for some people may be, but it is, again, it's not overdone. It's not meant to be, it's meant to move the story along, and it's there for a reason. But that is one of the themes that this book deals with as well. So, Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming along today, and we will see you next month again on Book Buzz. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.